But tonight, there was not any point where you looked like...
Of all people, you shouldn't ask me a question like that.
Well, no, but...
Because you're going to put me in there.
No, look...
No, I'm going to say that because you have.
Why?
Apologies for the language,
Because you know what Kevin Painter's like.
No, it's... No.
Mr. Taylor and me are going to meet sometime, and he better bring his A game, because if he doesn't, I'm going to put him to bed.
Phil Taylor is the most feared man in darts history, but not everyone respected the legend. In fact, some players didn't just clash with him, they downright hated him. From bitter rivalries to backstage bust-ups, here are 7 dart stars who went head-to-head with the power in ways you've never seen before. Paul Nicholson wasn't afraid of Phil Taylor, and that alone made him stand out in a sport where most players seem to bow down to the power. Back in 2011, Nicholson scored one of the biggest wins of his career when he knocked Taylor out of the UK Open. But instead of celebrating quietly, he did something darts fans still talk about to this day. He waved goodbye to Taylor as he walked off the stage. The crowd gasped, commentators were stunned, and Taylor? He was furious. Taylor later called Nicholson very silly for the stunt, saying he'd regret acting like that on such a big stage. But Nicholson didn't back down. He doubled down on his reputation as the sport's bad boy, someone who would bring a bit of swagger and attitude into a game that had always been built on tradition and respect. And fans loved it, or hated it. There was no in between.
Because I think he's going to make... Because he isn't a bad lad. Off stage, he's a nice person. He's trying to get a Premier League place, but using me as a... How can I say, as a springboard, I think he's a bit silly, really. If he starts getting the general public hating him, then his quality of life is going to go down the shooter.
The rivalry between Nicholson and Taylor wasn't just about one wave, it was about personality. Taylor represented the old guard, the unstoppable machine who dominated everyone in his path. Nicholson was the outsider, the one who wanted to shake things up, talk back, and show that darts could be about more than just numbers on the board. Every time they faced off, there was tension in the air. You could feel the crowd choosing sides. The loyalists who wanted Taylor to put the arrogant newcomer back in his place, and the rebels who cheered every time Nicholson pushed his buttons.
You can talk about him, so whatever he's doing right. I suppose any publicity is good publicity. But it's just if he can take it, you know. There's been a couple of players where I've had to go at him.
In many ways, Nicholson didn't just hate Taylor as a player, he hated what Taylor stood for, an untouchable champion who didn't like being challenged. And even though Nicholson never reached the same heights as Taylor in terms of titles, he carved his name into darts history for one reason. He dared to show open defiance against the most dominant player the sport had ever seen. But Nicholson wasn't the only one to clash with Taylor. In fact, another rival's grudge came from a far more personal place. Peter Manley. If Paul Nicholson was the rebel who taunted Taylor, Peter Manley was the rival who turned his frustration into a cold, unforgettable gesture. The year was 2002, and Taylor had just humiliated Manley in the World Championship final with a crushing 7-0 victory. For most players, the tradition is simple. You shake the winner's hand, accept defeat with grace, and move on. But Manley wasn't having it. Instead of congratulating Taylor, he flat out refused the handshake.
And I thought, do you know what, when he wins this, I'm just going to walk straight off.
The crowd booed, commentators were stunned, and the moment went down as one of the most awkward endings in darts history. To Manley though, it wasn't just about losing, it was about respect. He felt Taylor didn't show him any, and the silent snub was his way of firing back. It was a moment that exposed just how much resentment Taylor's dominance was building behind the scenes, and the grudge didn't end there. Years later, Manley revealed that he'd actually invited Taylor to his wedding in Las Vegas. Taylor didn't show up. For Manley, that was proof the relationship wasn't just frosty on stage, it was cold in real life too. The two eventually buried the hatchet, but fans still remember Manley as the man who broke darts etiquette by staring down the champion and saying, without words, "I've had enough of you." But while Manley's feud was fueled by anger and pride, another clash came from a rivalry that was supposed to be respectful, until one handshake almost turned into a fight. Raymond van Barneveld. Raymond van Barneveld and Phil Taylor were the giants of their era, the two men everyone wanted to see collide. Their rivalry delivered some of the greatest matches in darts history, but it also produced one of the ugliest confrontations ever caught on camera. It happened at the 2007 World Championship final. Taylor had just lost to Barney in an epic sudden death thriller, a match still considered one of the best games ever played. At the end, the two men went to shake hands, but instead of a simple gesture of sportsmanship, things got heated. Taylor gripped Barney's hand tight, pulled him close, and suddenly, it looked like they were about to shove each other. Security rushed in, and for a split second, fans thought the sport's two biggest names were going to throw more than darts. The incident shocked the darts world. Taylor later admitted he regretted the way he handled it, saying emotions got the better of him in the heat of defeat. But the damage was done. The handshake became a symbol of how much pressure and animosity brewed whenever those two shared a stage. For fans, it showed a side of Taylor rarely seen, vulnerable, angry, and unable to control the moment. For Barney, it was proof that even the greatest of all time could be rattled, and in that clash of legends, the respect between them teetered dangerously close to hate. But Taylor's problems didn't stop with the icons of the game. Even the rising stars were ready to call him out. Chris Mason. Chris Mason was never one to hold back his opinions, and when it came to Phil Taylor, he made sure the world knew exactly how he felt. Before one of their big matches in 2007, Mason openly called Taylor arrogant and suggested that the sport had been revolving around him for far too long. That kind of talk was unheard of at the time. Most players avoided taking shots at Taylor, at least in public. But Mason wasn't afraid. He went into the match swinging with words as much as with darts. When the game was over and Taylor came out on top, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The handshake at the end was anything but friendly, quick, cold, and dripping with animosity. Fans who saw it knew this wasn't just about competition. Mason genuinely didn't like Taylor, and the feeling seemed mutual. That moment stuck because it showed the other side of Taylor's dominance. For every player who bowed to his greatness, there was someone like Mason, someone who thought the legend was untouchable only because no one dared to speak up. Mason did, and even though he didn't topple Taylor, he left a lasting mark as one of the few brave enough to challenge him out loud. And if Mason's comments stung, the next feud came with a fiery clash right on stage, where one man felt Taylor didn't just dominate, he disrespected.
What about Kim Huybrechts then? We know what he's capable of.
I know exactly what he's going to do, I know exactly his tactics, I know exactly what he's going to do, and I'm going to have to shut his face because he's going to jump around the stage. So let's see what happens. Let's see, Kim Huybrechts has got the battle now. Let's see if he's up for a scrap, because he's going to get
Kim Huybrechts. For Kim Huybrechts, the rivalry with Taylor was personal. It wasn't just about darts, it was about respect. During the 2015 Premier League, Taylor took issue with the way Huybrechts celebrated on stage. Taylor claimed that Kim's jumping and fist pumping was over the top, even warning him that there would be trouble if he carried on like that. Huybrechts didn't back down. After one of their heated matches, he openly called Taylor disrespectful, firing back at the idea that he should tone down his celebrations just to please the sport's biggest star. To Kim, Taylor was trying to intimidate him into silence, and he wasn't about to let that happen. The spat didn't just play out on stage, it spilled into interviews where Huybrechts doubled down on his comments. Fans quickly took sides. Some argued that Taylor had earned the right to demand respect, while others said Kim was right. If Taylor could celebrate his wins, why shouldn't anyone else? What made this feud stand out is that it wasn't just about two men throwing darts, it was about an entire generation gap. Taylor came from the old school of straight-faced professionalism, while Huybrechts represented a new wave of emotion, energy, and flair. Their feud was a clash of eras, and in that sense, it was bigger than the match itself. But if Huybrechts thought Taylor's words were disrespectful, another story took things even further, because one rising star of the sport didn't just argue with Taylor, he physically snapped. Michael Van Gerwen and Phil Taylor weren't just rivals, they were two alpha personalities who couldn't stand being in each other's shadow. Their matches were fiery enough, but one story from backstage has become darts folklore. It happened at the Grand Slam of Darts. Taylor was bragging about his friendship with boxer Ricky Hatton, going on and on in the players area. Most people just rolled their eyes and let him talk, but not Van Gerwen. He snapped. MVG grabbed Taylor and body slammed him to the floor. Yes, the most dominant player in darts history was literally floored by the young Dutchman in a moment of pure frustration. On the Uch, their battles were just as heated. In 2014, Van Gerwen stunned the world with an unorthodox 127 checkout against Taylor, leaving fans speechless. But Taylor, being Taylor, still clawed his way back and took the win. For MVG, that loss stung deeply. 2 years later, he got his revenge at the 2016 World Match Play Final, destroying Taylor 18-10. It wasn't just a win, it was a statement. The balance of power was shifting. The relationship between them was never warm. Taylor represented the old dynasty, Van Gerwen the new. Their clashes weren't just games, they were battles for the throne, and for a time, it felt like darts wasn't big enough for both of them. But Van Gerwen wasn't the only one to shock Taylor. Another man pulled off one of the most famous upsets in darts history, and his grudge with Taylor spilled over even after his playing days.
Your composure.
No. You've asked me a question.
Look,
I'm going to answer you now. I'm going to answer you because you.
Right,
you're
your
taking the mick out
composure
of
was
me.
good in the first game.
No,
in the second
nothing
game
to
it
do
went.
with
In the
that.
third game it was back.
Wayne Mardle. Wayne Mardle will always be remembered for one of the greatest shocks in darts history. In the 2008 World Championship semi-final, he stood toe-to-toe with Taylor, the heavy favourite, and did the unthinkable. He beat him 5-4. The crowd went wild, and Mardle, overcome with emotion, teared up on stage. For him, beating Taylor wasn't just another win, it was the pinnacle of his career, a moment he dreamed of. But the story didn't end there. Years later, after Mardle had moved into punditry, he found himself face-to-face with Taylor once again, but this time off the Osh. In a post-match interview, Mardle asked Taylor a tough question about his performance. Taylor didn't take it well. He cut him off sharply, saying, "Of all people, you should not be asking me that." The air turned icy, and the awkward exchange quickly became infamous among darts fans. For Mardle, the rivalry with Taylor stretched across two worlds, first as a player, where he shocked him on stage, and then as a pundit, where he wasn't afraid to challenge him with words. Both moments showed the same thing. Mardle wasn't intimidated by Taylor, and he wasn't going to play by the unspoken rule of treating him like he was untouchable. But perhaps the most fascinating part of all these feuds is what they reveal, not just about Taylor's rivals, but about Taylor himself. Phil Taylor's career is unmatched. 16 world titles, decades of dominance, and the reputation as the greatest darts player of all time. But greatness doesn't come without enemies. From Paul Nicholson's mocking wave, to Peter Manley's refused handshake, to Raymond van Barneveld's near brawl, Taylor's legacy is lined with rivalries that cut deep. Chris Mason's words, Kim Huybrecht's defiance, Michael van Gerwen's physical outburst, and Wayne Mardle's shock upset. All of them chipped away at the myth that Taylor was untouchable. And maybe that's the real story here. The power wasn't just feared, he was resented, resisted, and in some cases, openly hated. For every trophy he lifted, there was someone in the background waiting for their chance to bring him down. That tension, that fire, is what made darts during his era so electrifying. Because when you dominate a sport the way Phil Taylor did, you don't just create fans, you create enemies, and sometimes it's the enemies who make the legend unforgettable.